So Jordan Peterson, since 2016, has become very famous around this idea. A lot of it's putting forward gender roles. You've been very critical of the way in which he discusses gender role. You know, the idea that men operate within a dominance hierarchy and they're trying to work their way up that dominance hierarchy. And what do you think of that whole thing?
My issue with Jordan Peterson is that, like, I'll agree with most of what he says on a descriptive level. Like, I think it's important to recognize differences between men and women. They're real, they exist, obviously. And there's different ways that men and women function in society. Mm-hmm. But I think that sometimes we make the mistake in society of we'll look at men and women where they are, and we'll assume that they could only ever be there because of our biological differences. And then we ignore the massive social drivers that we have that push us deeper into those fields. So, like, in my opinion, in a totally equitable world, totally equal, everybody has the same opportunity, same upbringing, blah, blah, blah. I think even in that world, you'd still see men and women choosing differently based on the profession, but you're not going to see like 90% of men and 10% of women in some areas. It's going to be like 55-45, or maybe a little bit larger, maybe a little bit smaller, depending on the area. But I feel like sometimes we make this mistake of like, well, women have always done this, so they'll never want to do this in the future. And I think that, at least in the United States, keep in mind when I speak, I'm always speaking U.S. social issues, so it might be slightly different in other parts of the world. But the United States, I think access to the workplace and access to birth control has like fundamentally altered women's relationship with society in ways that I don't think anybody would have ever believed. Nobody would have thought that like women could outperform men in math, for instance, because boys play with toys and women play with Barbie dolls, and women are more social and boys are more abstract and discrete in numbers and blah, blah. But we were starting to see for education that wasn't the case, right? Or the idea that, oh, women don't enjoy recreational sex, they'll never do that, that's horrible, women are the gatekeepers and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I don't know, with access to birth control, and they have the ability to have recreational sex without getting pregnant all the time, it seems like some of them do enjoy recreational sex. And so the scary thing about people like Jordan Peterson is sometimes he'll come in with these just so stories. He'll say, well, women are like this and men are like this, and because of this biologically, these things are never going to change. And it's like, some of these things might change, and I think we need to be a little bit more receptive or understanding of where those changes are going to happen so that we can be ready for it in the future.
Matt Walsh recently made a documentary in which he essentially went round asking a load of professors and people on the street, what is a woman? If he were on a debate panel with you and you were debating him and he just came to you with that question, how would you answer that question, or how do you think someone should answer that question?
It's a really difficult one. So the reality is one of the most important faculties that humans develop that is unique from every other animal on the planet. Regardless of what a vegan will tell you, humans are the only creature on the planet that have a sophisticated capacity for abstract thought and language. Language that goes beyond just I bark and you come. But in terms of being able to communicate, like I can communicate a negative to you, I can tell you something is not there, I can communicate something at a future time and date in another area. These types of things that humans have for language is incredibly complicated. Language is one of those things that we learn when we're 1 year old and we never think about it again, but it is so unbelievably complicated in terms of how we use language. Personally, for me, and there are tons of writers, Victor Zizek probably is going to have strong opinions on this. For me personally, as an uneducated whatever, when I think of language or I think of words, I think of we say a word, and when we say that word, you kind of invoke this family of concepts around the word, and they light up stronger or weaker depending on what you're talking about. So depending on how cheeky you want to be, if somebody asks you, like, what is a woman, right? You want to have a strong answer. But the reality is that these are really complicated things. For instance, even on a simple thing, if I ask you, like, what is a chair? You're not going to really give me a strong answer. It could have 4 legs, it could have 3 legs, it could be made of a soft material, it could be made of hard material, it could be like a big beanie bag, right? The reality is that when we say chair, it invokes kind of this family of concepts. And I think the same is true for women as well. If you want to talk like biology, if you want to talk chromosomes, like these are all things that are loosely associated with women, that's true. However, when we're existing in public and we identify like a man or a woman, we do that without seeing the chromosomes, without seeing the genitals, without any sort of, with very few biological indicators. Sometimes we'll just do it on clothes or like voice, right? We can identify online people as men or women. So I actually really liked, if you watch that documentary, there were a lot of good answers given by a lot of different people. I thought Jordan Peterson actually had some good answers. Now, when they play his answer in the documentary, they've got like the serious music and Matt Walsh is coming to him for the answer, so it seems like he's saying something reasonable. But his answer is really just as kind of loose as everybody else's. I think the final thing he says to Matt Walsh is like, so how do I find out what a woman is? And Jordan Peterson's like, well, why don't you marry one and find out, which is kind of how we discover everything in life and in language, is it's like that family of concepts, and you just keep associating with it, and then you refine and you iterate on that family of concepts as you add and remove qualities based on what a woman is or what a woman isn't. People with long hair, people with smooth skin, people blah, 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 yeah.
And you've debated quite a few people who are fans of Andrew Tate or within that category. And there are people like on the Fresh and Fit podcast. Where do you think all that comes from? And do you think it's linked to any of the Jordan Peterson stuff?
Yeah, I think I think we've made really good strides in society bolstering a lot of different types of minorities. So be it women or people of color or LGBT people. But it always feels like on the backs of all those movements, we always have to make sure everybody knows how much we hate white people or we want to kick down on men or whatever. And I think that when you do this for year after year after year over a decade, you get this kind of growing sentiment of young white guys, or even young men in general, who just kind of feel left out, or they feel like they don't have figures to look up to, or they feel like they're constantly being told they're not good, they're toxic, et cetera, all the time. And when that happens, you get this hunger from that group of people to find figures to look towards. Jordan Peterson filled that role originally, and now it's like all these red pill spaces and Andrew Tate that are kind of exploding and filling that new void. And
what's the best way you find of disarming a lot of their arguments?
It depends on the person. None of their arguments are based in very good data. So if somebody wants to sit down and actually go through studies, that could be a good way to do it. A lot of the time, I think what people really need to see on that side is people want to be happy and enjoy life. And sometimes on the left, it's really fucking hard to do that, right? So if I look on the right and I see Andrew Tate, like what's Andrew Tate telling me? He's telling me, buy a sword, be the master of your own destiny, go get, work, get Bugattis, get bitches, do all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, if I go to the left, what are they telling me? It's like, well, you need to feel bad because you're white and you're systemically oppressing everybody and capitalism is evil and you're privileged and everything you do is just because of your mom and dad. It's like, okay, well, fuck me, right? I feel like the left comes down on you so hard and it makes you feel like shit for everything in society. Like, oh, those shoes, those were made in a slave shop, or oh, that food that you bought, the person is a victim of capitalism and they probably don't have a pension. And it's like, okay. And then on the right, like you get like all these people that feel really empowering, they drive you further and further. So I feel like on the left, oftentimes I feel like my important role is to show that like, hey, I'm here, I've got a lot of really progressive beliefs, but I'm a happy person, I live a fun life, like I make money, I don't think that any of this is evil. And yeah, having like more figures like that, I think would be really important to show that you're not demonizing success and that you can be a left-leaning person and be aware of all these kind of social issues that affect us without being fucking miserable all the time and feeling like you're, an evil person.
Who have you found the most intellectually impressive or formidable person you've debated?
The problem is that if you're part of an ideological movement, the debate is going to never feel that fun because chances are you're captive to that audience and you're never going to change, right? Like if you're literally like your name is like Red Pill Rolo or Red Pill Creator, right? Like you're never going to be like, oh, that's a good point. Maybe women aren't like evil divorce monsters, Like you're not going to admit that because you're going to lose half your audience doing it. Honestly, I think some of my best debates are probably just people in my community that I pull on to have conversations with. There's a few well-known members of my community that just jump into my Discord to argue with me. I think those are the most fun because these are people that don't have strong attachments to any like political groups or ideologies, so they have a lot more flexibility to kind of like grow and change and like give me new and interesting ideas. Whereas on a lot of these online political spaces, you honestly, God, you hear like the same 4 or 5 fucking figures every single day from these people. It might be about trans kids or some person in a bathroom or a trans athlete or whatever. You hear this for like a year. Or in red pill space, it's like 80% of women initiate divorce and men are supposed to do this and women do that. And it's like the same thing every single day. So yeah, people that are less ideologically aligned, in my personal opinion, are more fun to argue with because they have more flexibility and room to grow. And they provide like a more unique perspective to argue against.
And are there any issues that they've changed your mind on?
Yeah, I've changed my mind on a ton of things over the years. I don't know if I've had any major shifts in opinion recently. The last big one I had was probably being persuaded away from the Citizens United thing in the United States that had to do with campaign finance. I used to think it was a really big deal. Now I don't think it's that big of a deal at all. I guess for Ukraine, before the invasion, I never thought it would happen. And I kind of didn't care much about the Ukrainian issues. But then once the invasion happened, I did like 2 weeks of pretty hardcore research and got a lot more information there. But I guess it wasn't a big like changing of the mind.